Hey everybody, welcome to Board Online, Board Offline. Today we're going to bring you our second part of Perdition's Mouth, Abyssal Rift instructional series. Now, in the second part, we're going to be teaching you everything about the gameplay except for combat. That will be covered in the third part of this video series, the third and final part. Now, if you haven't seen the first part, go back and watch that. We cover the setup and a lot of the basic rules that you need to understand. And today we're going to be getting into detail on everything you need to know for gameplay. Now, before we get down into the gameplay, I do want to mention our sponsor, StoneValleyGames.com. This is a fantastic online and brick-and-mortar game store. They like to refer to themselves as your friendly, distant game store. You can go out and check them out at StoneValleyGames.com. They have all kinds of fantastic programs going on over there. They've got a loyalty program if you are a return customer. They have a program set up where if you're in the military and you're stationed overseas, AA, AE, or AP address, then they will ship to you for free. I know that would have been a fantastic thing to have back when I was stationed over in Germany with an AE address. And then, of course, if you're in the continental United States, and you order $100 or more from them, they will ship to you for free as well. So go check out StoneValleyGames.com. There is a link in the description below. Now, Perdition's Mouth takes place in separate rounds, which repeat until all heroes either exit the map, all heroes are killed, or the heroes complete or fail the scenario's goals. Each round begins with the hero phase, during which each hero takes one turn. As we mentioned, heroes can take turns in any order. However, it is important to realize that once a hero begins their turn, they must complete it before another hero's turn can begin. First, a hero will gain action points. This is determined by how much health they currently have. In this case, you can see that Bastion is at full health, and so he'll get 6 action points. It's important also to remember that you will always gain at least 3 action points, even if there are some modifiers that would seem to indicate you would gain less. You then use your action points to move your peg forward on the Stone of Destiny. You must always move at least 1 space forward, but can move forward more depending on your number of action points. Also, now is a good time to point out that bash and aimed shot are actually part of the same spoke, even though each of them are different types of actions, even though one is for melee characters and one is for ranged characters. Once you've selected your action, you may play hero cards to boost your action, and other players can play their cards to aid your action. Most actions will resolve once you draw 1 or more response cards. Once you draw the first enemy response card for an action, though, you can no longer play hero cards, spend action points, receive further aid, or play abilities to modify the action. Essentially, drawing the response card for an enemy locks you in. Move actions do not require response cards to be drawn unless it's the sprint spoke. Also, it's important to note that once you begin moving, you can no longer play additional cards or abilities. If an action has multiple steps, then resolve each step as a separate action. The charge action allows you to move and then attack. So you play cards for the move action and resolve the movement. Then you play attack cards for attacking and then resolve the attack. The special action allows you to play special abilities and cards and then move. These are resolved as separate steps. When you complete your action, turn your hero peg inward. Once every player has taken a turn, turn all hero pegs outward again, and begin the enemy phase. Begin the enemy phase by drawing a response card. If the eye appears on it, as it does here, then players choose 2 enemy figures in the reserve pool. In this example, there are only 2 enemies in the reserve pool, but you would choose 2 enemies and move one of these figures to the primary spawn pool and one to the secondary spawn pool. If the reserve does not contain enough enemies for this action, then you only move as many enemies as you can. Even if all insectoid nests on the map have been destroyed, the players may still choose to move insectoids from the reserve if they're available. If the reserve pool is completely out of enemies, then you simply don't move any enemies at this point. Enemy actions appear on the enemy watchstone. The number on the response card you just drew determines how you move the enemy marker on the watchstone. If it had been a 1 card, then you would move the enemy marker 1 spoke clockwise on the watchstone. All enemies take the action on the spoke where the marker lands. However, if it's a 2 card or higher, as you see here, the enemies take multiple actions this phase. To help track the enemy's actions, you can place the second enemy token on the last action they'll take. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's the 4th action they'll take, so we'll place it there. And now we'll begin resolving them one at a time. Moving this forward, all enemies will resolve this action, and when they're done, we'll move it forward again until it reaches the last action, which will be resolved as well. If you draw a 0 card, do not move the enemy marker. The enemies will take the action on the marker's current spoke. And if you get a -1 card, move the enemy marker counterclockwise by 1 spoke. The enemies will then take that action. The primary spawn action indicated by this circle, the move action, the attack action, and then the secondary spawn action indicated by the square. We'll discuss enemy spawning, moving, and attacking in part 3 of this video series. As we've mentioned, each enemy on the map takes the current action once, and then after the enemy acts, you either continue to the next enemy action on the watchstone, or a new round begins with the new hero phase if this was the final action on the watchstone, as you see here. During the enemy's turn, players may play defense cards to boost their own defense or aid another hero's defense. Players will draw a response card and add it to the enemy's attack. Once this card is drawn, you can no longer play hero cards to affect the action. Enemies will always act in the order of insectoids first, then cultists, and then demon. And then within each of those categories, they will act from smallest to largest or from top to bottom of their reference sheet. Enemies of the same type will act according to priorities, starting with the enemy closest to a hero. And we'll discuss all of that in more detail in the 3rd video of this series. In order to move, attack, or use your special ability, you must first select an action on the Stone of Destiny. The stone contains 8 spokes with 8 different actions. Each spoke has 1, 2, or 3 peg holes where you can place your hero peg and take an action. To advance your peg on the board, you spend 1 action point per spoke, and keep in mind this is per spoke, not per peg hole. And then place your peg in the action you've selected. You must always move the peg clockwise. When moving your peg, if a spoke has no available peg holes, you may skip it entirely and move on to the next one. This does not cost any additional action points. And remember, you must move at least 1 spoke clockwise in your turn. You cannot keep your hero peg in the same spoke to repeat your previous turn's actions. You also may play numeric move cards for action points equal to the card's number, and then use the points to move your hero peg. You can also play any non-wound card for 1 action point each, and other heroes can play move numeric cards to aid you with action points. Just to reiterate, bash and aimed shot are 1 spoke. Only ranged heroes can use aimed shot, and only melee heroes can use bash. This means that if aimed shot already has a hero peg in it, then ranged heroes will completely skip over this spoke. Likewise, if bash already has a hero peg in it, then melee heroes will completely skip over this spoke. Leftover action points may be used to improve some actions. For example, a move action can always be improved with your leftover action points, since action points and move points are essentially the same thing. Circled actions can be improved at a 2-to-1 ratio, essentially meaning that the improvement is halved. But that means that you can improve your attack with action points, whereas normally you could not. Most actions on the Stone of Destiny have optional steps, but you must take the steps in the order shown from left to right. The move action allows you to draw a hero card and then move. When you're moving, you'll spend action points to move, and we'll discuss movement in detail shortly. When you take the special action, you may use your special ability on your hero sheet. When doing so, you may play special hero cards before and or after the ability on your hero sheet. And then after using special abilities, you may spend action points to move. But since this is circled, the action point cost of all movement and movement-related actions is doubled. This includes penalties from terrain and threatened squares. For the attack action, you first may draw a hero card. And then, since this is circled, before attacking, you may spend action points to improve your attack. You gain +1 attack for every 2 action points spent. And then finally, you make 1 attack. The sprint action allows you to spend action points to move. When you begin to move, draw a response card, and gain action points equal to the card's number. This is in addition to your normal action points. The defend action allows you to draw a hero card, then spend action points to improve your defense, in which case you would take 1 defend token for every 2 action points spent. Each of these tokens provides +1 defense against all attacks, and you hold on to them until your next turn. As long as your hero peg is on this spoke, you are defending. When attacked, you will draw a response card for yourself. We'll discuss enemy attacks in detail in the next video. When taking the charge action, you may spend action points to move, and then after moving, you may resolve 1 attack. Keep in mind that since these are resolved separately, you may play move hero cards to boost your movement, and then after resolving your movement, you may play hero cards to boost your attack. When you take the rest action, you must shuffle your discarded hero cards back into your deck. You must then draw hero cards until your hand equals your starting hand size. For the entire time that your hero peg is in this spoke, you cannot aid other heroes. If you rest in a space with a flea mattress, you also heal 1 health. As we've mentioned a couple of times, the bash and aimed shot spoke act as 2 different actions, but are 1 spoke, and only a ranged hero can use aim shot, only a melee hero can use bash. When using aim shot, you may resolve 1 attack, and for this attack you will gain +1, as you can see here. You may also play attack hero cards to boost this attack. Then, after resolving that attack, you may move 1 space. This move costs no action points even if you move into special terrain or leave a threatened square. However, moving into special terrain may cause a failure event. It's also important to realize you cannot spend action points on this action to move more than 1 space. For bash, you may make 1 attack. You may play attack hero cards to boost this attack as normal. When you resolve the attack, draw a response card and add its number to the attack, as you can see here. If your target survives the attack, push it 1 square directly away from your hero, even if your attack fails. If, by doing so, you have successfully pushed the hero into a different square, or if the enemy dies, then you must immediately move 1 square toward that enemy. If you had attacked diagonally and pushed the enemy here, for instance, then you would actually move diagonally. This movement costs no action points, even if you move into special terrain or leave a threatened square, but keep in mind, moving into special terrain may cause a failure penalty. You also cannot spend action points on this action to move more than 1 square. The enemy will automatically suffer a failure event if you push them into a wall or into special terrain. Most move actions, such as move, sprint, and charge, allow you to move into an adjacent square for each action point spent. Remember, adjacent is any orthogonal space. Characters generally cannot move diagonally. All figures on the map, whether they are enemies or heroes, block movement. Walls, closed doors, and treasure chests also block movement. You may play move numeric cards to gain AP in order to move farther, but you must play these cards before you begin moving. If other heroes play cards to aid your movement, be sure to check the range penalty before you begin moving as well. Players do not place their hero figures on the map during setup. Instead, they must take a move action, move, sprint, charge, etc. And the first AP that they spend moves them onto the entrance square. Heroes that are not on the map cannot play cards or take actions other than to facilitate moving onto the map. They also cannot be targeted by attacks or abilities, they cannot aid or be aided, and cannot interact with other figures in any way until they are on the map. When you move onto the exit square, you immediately remove your figure from the board. Then, at the end of the hero phase, remove your peg from the Stone of Destiny. Once your figure leaves the map, you cannot re-enter. Each square within one range of an enemy is a threatened square. So in this case, the Acolyte is threatening all of these squares. Disengaging from a threatened square costs 1 additional action point. So it would cost the hero 2 action points to move here. However, moving into a threatened square does not have an additional cost, so moving from one threatened square into another threatened square still only costs 1 additional AP. So it would cost the hero 1 AP to move here, and then 2 more to move here, and then 2 more to move here, and then 2 more to move here. Penalties for threatened squares don't stack, so the cost is still only +1 action point, even when there are multiple enemies threatening. So here we have 2 enemies threatening this square. It is still only 2 action points to move here. It's also important to note that heroes do not cause threatened spaces for enemies. During any move action, you can spend action points to perform minor actions. You may move before and after taking these actions, as long as you still have action points to spend, of course. So let's discuss these different minor actions. For 1 action point, a player can open or close a door. Doors are placed on the line between 2 spaces. When a player moves up to a door, they may open or close that door. When the map is initially set up, doors are generally closed and unlocked unless otherwise specified. If the door is locked, the player will either have to break it or pick the lock. We'll discuss picking the lock shortly, and we'll discuss breaking the door in the next video as it is considered an attack. Levers are marked with a rune on the scenario sheet and on their token. To pull a lever costs 1 action point, and the hero must be within range 1. In most cases, a lever will open or close the door or portcullis with the matching rune as printed on the map. It's also possible, though, that a scenario may describe other uses for levers. For 1 action point, a player may give a treasure to another hero who is adjacent to them. The treasure can be in an active slot or a backpack slot, and can be put into the active or backpack slot of the hero it's given to. It's important to note that you cannot take a treasure on your turn, you can only give a treasure on your turn. For 1 action point, you can loot a dead hero within range 1. For each action point spent, you may take 1 item from the dead hero's active slots or backpack. The player can spend action points to pick a lock on a treasure chest in range 1 of their hero or a door on the edge of the square their hero occupies. First, declare any number of available action points that you will spend attempting to pick the lock. You may spend numeric move cards and or 1 all symbol card. Then, draw 2 response cards. The action points that you spent must beat the sum of these cards' numbers. If it was a treasure chest you unlocked, you would immediately collect its treasure by drawing a card from the treasure deck and then removing the treasure chest from the map. If it's a door, you would flip it to its open side. That door now remains unlocked, and anyone can now close it and open it normally, but it can never be locked again. It's important to realize that a portcullis does not have a lock and cannot be picked, and can only be opened by a lever or by destroying it. Some hero abilities allow you to teleport. This functions essentially as movement. For example, teleporting 4 squares is the same as moving 4 squares, except it does have a few additional rules and exceptions. No squares block your movement when teleporting, so 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be a valid way to teleport. You would ignore any action point penalties for terrain and threatened squares. You ignore terrain failure events except for the square where you end the teleport as you reappear in the material world. You must end your movement in an empty square as usual, and you cannot use teleportation movement for movement-related actions such as pulling levers or picking locks. There are numerous types of terrain in Perdition's Mouth, and while I'm not going to go through each of them, they are listed on page 20 of the rulebook, I will discuss penalties and failure events. The penalties listed for each of these indicate that they are squares with a movement penalty cost more than one action point. This cost is always to enter the square and never to leave the square. Each of these also lists a failure event. A failure event may occur when you move into a square of special terrain. When you enter the special terrain, you will draw one response card for each enemy within range 1 of that square. If any of the drawn response cards have the eye symbol, as this one does, then you suffer that square's failure event. In the case of rubble, which is what this symbol is, the failure event is that it ends movement. Insectoid nests within range 1 have no bearing on how many response cards you draw. The same is true for occultist trapdoors. If a figure is ever pushed into a terrain with a failure event, it immediately suffers the failure event with no chance to avoid it. As we've already mentioned, of course, failure events occur after you enter the square. The end movement penalty will prevent you from spending any more action points for movement or movement actions that turn. However, your turn is not over. Terrain such as uneven or rubble can cause this to happen. However, concealment can actually cause your turn to end. The end turn penalty prevents you from taking any action after moving. If a figure is pushed into a terrain that causes them to end their turn or end their movement, even if the push effect would push them farther, they'll stop there. If you push a figure into a wall, it slams the figure for 1 damage, and the figure ends movement in the square in front of the wall. Movement penalties do not affect insectoids or the demon. It's also important to note that enemies suffer failure events when pushed into a square, but they never suffer failure events for intentionally moving into that square. However, occultist does have to pay the same action point penalty for moving into special terrain as heroes do. However, occultists, regardless of action points required, can always move at least 1 square. You open a treasure chest by picking its lock with a move action or by breaking the chest with an attack, as we've mentioned. When you open the chest, you draw a card from the treasure deck and place that treasure next to an active slot or backpack on your hero sheet. Sometimes the treasure you find will be a potion. When you draw a potion from the treasure deck, place it in a slot, and you may then choose to draw another treasure. Sometimes, though, traps will be what you find. When you draw a trap from the treasure deck, immediately resolve the trap's text. Then discard it to the treasure deck's discard pile. You may then choose to draw another treasure. In either case, if the next treasure is also a potion or trap, then you may draw another treasure, and you may keep drawing until you find a larger treasure. Treasure cards may have any number of symbols on them. For instance, a class symbol indicates that the treasure cannot be used unless the hero has the symbol shown. Treasure also can be either melee or ranged. In this case, it's ranged, and cannot be used unless the hero has that symbol. Treasure can be weapons or armor. And remember, you can only have 1 active weapon and 1 active armor at a time. This symbol means the treasure is temporary. You may use this treasure once during your turn while it is in an active slot, and after using this treasure, resolve the appropriate action, then draw a response card. If the response card has the eye symbol, then you have exhausted the treasure and must discard it. This symbol means the treasure is permanent, and it will provide its bonuses while in an active slot. And this symbol means the treasure is consumable. The treasure provides a one-time bonus. You use this treasure when appropriate and then discard it to the treasure deck's discard pile. And you may use consumables from your backpack. On your turn, you may take any of the following actions at any time with no cost in action points. You may use a temporary or consumable treasure in an active slot. You may use a consumable treasure in your backpack. You may move your treasures to different active slots or backpacks on your hero sheet, or swap treasures in different slots on your hero sheet. A treasure may only change slots once per turn, however. A temporary or permanent treasure's effects end the moment you move them into the backpack. Also, these actions I just mentioned can only be taken on your turn. You also may drop a treasure at any time to free up a slot for another treasure. A drop treasure will be discarded into the discard pile and not onto the board. It cannot be picked up by another hero. Victims are poor souls captured for some nefarious purpose, and you receive a karmic reward or punishment for how you treat them. The scenario sheets will explain where victims will appear on the map. During your turn, you may pick up a victim within range 1 at no cost in action points, and the victim must then be placed in an empty active slot or your backpack as though it were a treasure. You may also drop a victim in any square within range 1 at no cost in action points. You rescue a victim by dropping it in the rescue square. The rescue square will always be marked in the scenario setup, but if it's not, the default is the entrance square. If a hero dies or a hero exits the map while carrying a victim, then the victim dies. When the last hero exits the map and there are still victims on the map, all victims left on the map die. If an attack ever targets a victim, it automatically hits and the victim dies. However, keep in mind, enemies do not intentionally attack victims, but the victim might be caught in an area effect attack or something like that. When you rescue a victim, draw a card from the victim hero deck and place it in your hand. This adds a strong numeric card to your deck. When a victim dies, draw a card from the victim response deck and add it to your response deck's discard pile. A victim response card always counts as 0 when drawn to benefit a hero, such as the response card drawn for defending. But when drawn to benefit an enemy, use the card's actual number. The goal of each scenario is to make it alive to any of the exits which lead to the next scenarios, unless specified otherwise in the scenario sheet. The scenario ends when the last hero exits the map, or it ends when all heroes are killed, or it ends when the heroes complete or fail any scenario-specific goals. Afterwards, the heroes may camp and rest before moving onward. Restore all heroes to their starting hit points. Any fatigue tokens are discarded. All cards in the player's hand and discard pile are shuffled back into the deck. All hero pegs are removed from the Stone of Destiny, and the enemy pools are emptied. When playing a campaign, record the changes on a save sheet for future scenarios. And that is everything you need to know for the gameplay of Perdition's Mouth. Now, in the next video, we will cover combat, so be sure to come back and check that out. Check out our giveaway we currently have going on for a insert for Frosthaven. We're giving away the folded space insert for Frosthaven, so check that out. We also will be filming how to play Frosthaven Part 1. We'll be filming very soon. We've got how to play Aeon Trespass Odyssey coming up soon, and how to play Australia. Check all of that out, and until next time, if you're bored online, board offline.